What's going on, guys? It's me, Zach, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. So in this one, I'm going to go over 5 players I've identified as some of the best values in auction drafts specifically. So I'll start off by going into how I arrived at these players and sort of explain how you can do this for your league specifically as well. I did tailor most of these players to ESPN drafts compared to the Fantasy Pros ADP. So certainly worth taking a look at how this varies on your platform because these projected auction costs will change depending on the platform you're on. I just like to use ESPN as the example because that's the most popular. But before we get into the video, I just want to thank you guys again for all the support we've been getting. Last I checked, we were over 120 subscribers, so that's awesome. The goal was 100 by the start of the season. I thought that was unrealistic, but we're really flying up there. Still have that goal of 200 by the start of the season now. Again, it's probably really unrealistic, but let's see what we can do. If you are new to the channel, thank you for stopping by. I hope I can help you out in terms of winning your fantasy championship this season. If you do get any value out of this video, please do give it a like. And like I said, if you're new to the channel, please feel free to subscribe and click the bell for notifications. Upload at least 3 videos a week. We've got the website in the works. We'll have rankings and tiers posted there, as well as auction values. And then we'll try to update that website throughout the season so that you got weekly rankings as well. And that'll all be free for all of you guys. I'm not going to charge you guys any money for just me having fun here. So yeah, with that, let's get started with the video. So before I get into explaining to you guys which of the players I chose, I just sort of wanted to explain to you guys how I got here. What I did was I went through the projected auction value on the ESPN platform in a 12-team PPR league. So that's something you might want to look into specifically for your league. I'll try and reference the Excel sheet I used as well in the description and see so you can use it for your own league. But I do think that in general it should be pretty accurate across all leagues. So then I took those projected auction values for each player and then plotted them against that player's ADP. So that's what you see all those data points for. And then I did a exponential regression of that data to get a function that relates the average draft position to these players' expected costs. So as you can see, anybody that's above that dotted line would come out to be overpriced in terms of what you're paying for them in an auction draft versus what you're paying for them in a snake draft. And anybody below that is a player that you should be looking to view as a value when you're taking auction or when you're in the middle of an auction draft. So yeah, I hope that made sense. If it doesn't, maybe listen to it again. I guess the gist of it is that I took expected costs of players, plotted them against their ADP, got a function, and then anybody below that trend line's a value, and anybody above that is viewed as a bit overpriced when you're in an auction draft compared to how much you'd be paying in a snake. The first player I want to start with here is Nick Chubb. He came in as one of the most ridiculous values here when you're in an auction draft compared to Snake. Chubb has an ADP in PPR formats of 16th overall. That's per Fantasy Pros, so obviously check your platform, but in general, he's going in the mid to late second round, maybe early third at the latest. But he comes in as the 29th most expensive player in an ESPN auction draft. And obviously that's pretty screaming value there. If you get him at that cost, it's the equivalent of getting him in the late third round, even though his ADP is in the early to mid second. So that's pretty ridiculous value there. Based on his ADP, per the regression, you should be paying about 22% of your total budget for him. But it only projects to cost 16.5. So that's quite a bit of savings you're getting if you're getting Nick Chubb. And Nick Chubb's a guy that I personally am at least as high on as consensus. So I don't see any reason to think why this value shouldn't be capitalized on. The next player that came in as a pretty big value here was Justin Herbert. This was one that sort of upset me a little bit because I generally find myself straying away from those elite quarterbacks, especially in snake drafts, just because of the opportunity cost you pay to get those guys. But Herbert comes in as the 56th most expensive player on ESPN auction drafts, despite an average draft position of 35th overall. The same could pretty much be said for Josh Allen. He's comes in as the 42nd most expensive player, despite an ADP of 22. So basically, you're getting each of these guys the equivalent of 2 rounds after their consensus ADP if you get them at face value in an auction draft. So I do actually find myself pretty consistently leaving auction drafts with one of these guys. There will certainly be leagues. The quarterback position is one where in auction leagues, there's a lot of variance in terms of how much they go for. So I'm still by no means going to pay a ridiculous amount for Herbert or Josh Allen, because I think that, like I've said many times before, I love guys like Jalen Hurts and Russell Wilson you can get for much cheaper later. But um, if you can get these guys at face value, they do actually turn out to be a pretty good value. I would be more than happy to draft Justin Herbert in the 5th round of a snake draft, and getting Josh Allen in the middle of the 4th round in a snake draft is something I'd be open to as well. Um, so I think that in an auction draft at face value, these guys actually become reasonable values, despite, to me, not even really being draftable in snake. Based on their ADP, you should be paying about 11.5% of your budget for these guys, for Herbert, but he only projects to cost about 6. I think that 11% is quite high. I think that 6% number, 6 to 7 or 8, would be about how much I'm willing to pay. So I wouldn't go up to that 11.5%, because I think that's when you really start hurting your team. But um, getting that much of a difference maker at the quarterback position for less than 8% of your budget, to me, makes a lot of sense. So the next player I found to be quite a large value here was Kyle Pitts. He's another player that I found myself fading pretty consistently due to his late round 3 ADP, sometimes slipping into that early 4th. But Pitts comes in as the 49th most expensive player in auction drafts, which makes him the equivalent of a 5th round draft pick. That's certainly a round I'd love to target Kyle Pitts in. Nobody's getting Kyle Pitts in the 5th round in snake drafts, so paying face value for him seems like quite the bargain. I found that in general, sort of the same with those quarterbacks I mentioned, Josh Allen and Justin Herbert being values. These higher end tight ends all actually came in as pretty good values in auction drafts compared to their ADP. So if you find yourself as someone who believes in Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, Darren Waller, Travis Kelce at their consensus ADP in a snake draft, then I find them to be even better values in an auction draft at face value, and you should maybe even willing to overpay for them a little bit. Based on ADP, Kyle Pitts should be costing about 12% of your total budget, but he only projects to cost 7.5%. I've got no problem paying 10% of your budget for Kyle Pitts. It's just when you get into that 12%, it gets a little steep. I know it seems finicky to be picky about that 2%, but every dollar counts when you're in an auction draft. You sort of have to go into each draft setting your limits on each player. I've got mine set. You obviously should be setting yours as well, but based on consensus ADP, Kyle Pitts certainly comes in at a value at his projected 7.5% cost in ESPN formats. The next player that came in as a pretty large value here was A.J. Dillon, and that made me really excited because I love A.J. Dillon at his consensus ADP in snake drafts. I think he's going to be a really usable RB2 this season with obvious RB1 upside if in any week that Aaron Jones misses, and we know that Aaron Jones probably will miss a few weeks this season. He's got an average draft position of 63rd overall, but he's the 94th most expensive player in an auction draft on ESPN. So there's just, to me, absolutely no reason not to target Dillon. You're not going to be at a snake draft this season where A.J. Dillon slips 3 rounds in ADP. So to me, he's a screaming buy, especially in auction drafts. Funny enough, Tony Pollard had about the same discrepancy, just a little bit smaller than A.J. Dillon. He's another guy I like targeting. I do find myself leaving a lot of fantasy drafts with both Pollard and A.J. Dillon, just because they seem to be undervalued in auction compared to their snake draft. Based on average draft position, you should be paying about 4.5% of your budget for A.J. Dillon, but he projects to cost 1%. So that's by by the scale there, that's one of the best bargains we've seen so far here. And like I said, he's basically free in auction drafts. I've been in many drafts where A.J. Dillon ends up going for 5% of that auction value, or 5% of your budget, just because I think that a lot of people are realizing how undervalued he is. But in your leagues, your league mates might not realize that. If you can get him for 1 to 2%, Jesus, that's crazy good value. He's going to be a pretty consistent low-end RB2 for you all season with obvious upside. And again, you're going to get him for about free, it seems like. And the last player that came in as a pretty notable discount for me here was DeAndre Hopkins. He's a player I've been a little scared of in snake drafts just because he's got that ADP of 74th overall, so he ends up being a late 6th to early 7th round draft pick. I just have a hard time drafting there because those are sort of the rounds where you're drafting players that you're counting on playing each week, and obviously you're not going to have him for those first 6 weeks. But he comes in as the 90th most expensive player in ESPN auction drafts, and that makes him a value to me. Oddly enough, he was one of very few receivers that in the top 100 by ADP that projected to be a value in auction drafts. I believe it was him, Elijah Moore, and like Treylon Burks were the only 3 that projected to be a value. So it seems to me that in general, in most of these auction drafts, a lot of these wide receivers do go for a little pricey, which is all the more reason why I feel like I've been staying away from especially the higher end receivers in fantasy drafts this season. But based on consensus ADP, you should be paying about 3.5% of your budget for Hopkins, and he only projects to cost 1.5%. So again, in an auction draft, you're getting him for pretty much free, and I would be willing to pay 2.5% to 3% for Hopkins. It's just that I wouldn't go quite up to that 3.5% to 5% range, which happens on occasion with some leagues. So just be careful with Hopkins, but I think that if you're getting him at the bargain he's got so much upside that he's worth the flyer. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.